So our series is called Woulda, Shoulda, Coulda, because we've all had those moments in our life that we look back on, and so much easier to see these moments in the rearview mirror than it is to see them sometimes coming at us. But we've all had those moments when we look back on and say, man, if I just would have done what I should have done, then all of this could have been different. Then things could have been a lot different than they are. And in this series, we're asking ourselves some questions that if we keep asking these questions, they will change the trajectory of our life. They will end us up in different places than we would have ended up if we hadn't been asking these questions. And so last week we dove into the questions and we asked the question, am I being responsible with everything I've been given? Am I being responsible with everything I've been given? If we keep asking that question, it'll lead us to begin to live, to be more responsible and more faithful with the things that God has given to each one of us. And this week we're asking this question, what is the wisest thing to do? What is the wisest thing to do? And this is one of those questions that ought to be on our lips all the time, to keep asking that question as we come up to the decisions that we make in our life. What is the wisest thing for us to do? Because you'll start to see how these weeks go together. Responsibility is nothing more than a series of wise decisions. Somebody who lives a responsible life is nothing more than a person who has decided to continually make wise decisions in their life that lead together to become a responsible life. We know that our decisions are a huge thing in our life, and we need wisdom to guide those decisions. Our decisions determine our story. They are what will determine our story more than our circumstances, more than our upbringing, more than the hurts or the failures of our life. It will be the decisions that we make about those things that determine our story. Our circumstances and our hurts, all those things affect us, but they will become the wallpaper on the walls of the room where the story of our life is lived out through the decisions that we make. And you've probably heard somebody who's got this great overcoming kind of story, where their life was headed in one particular direction and things didn't look good and things weren't going great and their circumstances were not good. But then somewhere along the way, when they start telling you about the overcoming part of their story, they will all say the same thing. This wasn't going well, things looked bad, but then one day, I decided. One day, I made a decision. Yeah, things weren't ideal. Yeah, things weren't all going my way, but I decided, and that changed the trajectory and the course of my life. When I was in college, I was playing football, had a great time. I had just finished up my junior year of college at Azusa Pacific University. Had played football there that season. And it was about February-ish, I remember. The football season was now over, and we were getting ready for spring practice. And I was at Azusa Pacific because I was preparing for ministry. I was getting ready to go into the ministry. Felt like this was kind of the way that my life was headed, but I wanted to play football as long as I could. And I was really looking forward to getting to play my last year, my senior year of football in college, and then call that done and then start into ministry and go that way. But after my junior season, I got a phone call from this guy who was pastoring a church about an hour away or so. And he said, hey, I would love for you to come and be my youth pastor at my church. And so I asked him the question, hey man, if I come and do that, am I going to get to keep playing football? Am I going to get to play out my senior season of football? And he says, I don't think so. I think we would need you full time, and I don't think that would give you the time to get to go back and play football because you'd be working here. So you're going to have to make a choice. And I realized I was at a crossroads. I mean, I really wanted to play out my last season of football, and I wondered if I made the decision to go and to take the job, be a youth pastor at this church, if I would regret leaving my senior season of football behind, because I would never get it back again. I'd be giving up eligibility, all that stuff. But I also worried that if I didn't take the job, then maybe I would miss this awesome opportunity to work with this friend of mine and be in this great church and have a great start to ministry if I wouldn't regret missing that. I was trying to navigate this minefield where it seemed like regret could blow up in my face at any turn. Well, man, I wish I could tell you that I was all spiritual about it and said, oh, Heavenly Father, if you want me to give up this football career to go and serve you in the ministry and no longer bash people in the head on Saturday afternoons like I really enjoy doing, then I will give this, I wish I could tell you I was all spiritual about it, but I got to tell you, with much kind of, angst in my heart, I decided to let my senior year of football go, give up my eligibility, and take this job being a youth pastor in this church. But as things go, the first people that I met at this church, the first family who befriended me, who took this young youth pastor in and make sure I had a hot meal every week and, was doing the things I needed to do, that was friends to me, that family became my in-laws. I married their daughter, right? Yeah, you're clapping. My wife's going, woulda, shoulda, coulda. It's the decisions that we make that shape our life. And one of these days, it may be at your high school reunion, it may be some further season in your life down the road, somebody is going to ask you, what happened? What happened to you? How did you get where you are? And the answer is going to start with us saying, well, the way I got here is that one day I decided. I made some decisions. I looked at what was coming at me and I started to make some decisions. And if our decisions play that big a role in our life, then they are going to need some guidance. Our decisions are going to need a roadmap, some help to know how we filter out the really great things to decide and the not so great things to decide. And the Apostle Paul gives us some help here in a letter that he wrote to the church in Ephesus, a letter to the Ephesians. And in chapter 5 of that letter, this is what Paul writes to help us with decisions. He says, be very careful how you live. In other words, your decisions matter. He was painting the picture of somebody being careful where they put every step that they took. Be careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. He says, don't be foolish here. This is nothing to mess around with. Understand what the Lord's will is. And what he's saying here is that it's wisdom that we need to guide our decisions because the days that we live in, the days that he was living in, are not neutral. That if you just go with the flow, if you just roll with the slope of culture, if you just go where everybody else is going, you're not going to accidentally drift into better and better decisions. You're not going to just accidentally drift into better and better things in your life. The slope of the world we live in is away from the best things that God has in mind for us and is towards things that are evil. And all you got to do is look around our culture to know that's true. That if we just go with what's coming at us, we won't necessarily make the best decisions. So it's why we should always ask the question, what is the wisest thing to do? And it's why we should never ask some of these kinds of questions as we're making decisions. It's why we should never ask the question, well, what's wrong with it? When we're making decisions, that's a horrible question to ask. What's wrong with it? Because to quote your mom and my mom, just because there's nothing wrong with it doesn't mean there's something right with it. Isn't this what your mom told you when you were growing up? This is how 97.5% of affairs get started. I just totally made that statistic up, but it sounds like it should be right, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds like that should be it. I mean, where people go, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with having a cup of coffee with her? What's wrong sending a few text messages to him? What's wrong chatting with him on Facebook? What's wrong with those things? There's nothing wrong with it. But isn't that a horrible question to ask when you're trying to make the wisest decision? Because normally what's wrong with something, just because there's nothing wrong with it doesn't necessarily mean there's something right with it. It's why we should also never ask the question, what's my heart telling me to do? I mean, this is akin to, how do I feel about this? Because even though our emotions are incredibly important to us, even though our emotions play an incredible role as the lights on the dashboard of our life that tell us that something is going on that needs our attention, even though emotions are incredibly important to us, they are not good tools to use when you're making a decision and when you want to make the wisest decision. We got to go out and watch that movie, Inside Out, the Pixar movie. If you haven't seen it, you need to go see it. You really do. Great movie, probably the most insightful movie that I've ever seen about the inner workings of our emotions and how they work in us and help us. Even sadness and anger are given to us to help us in certain ways. But they are not great tools to help us to make decisions. In fact, it's the emotionally charged moments of our life that often lead us into the worst possible decisions. The 19-year-olds that are just so in love that know that love will carry them through any obstacle, like not having an education and having no money to speak of. You know, those emotionally charged moments that we know are headed for disaster if they use emotions to make their decisions. It's why we should never ask the question, what's my heart telling me? And if we want to make wise decisions, we shouldn't ask the question, what's everybody else doing? Because I don't know about you, but oftentimes what everybody else is doing often just tries to validate whatever I want to do, right? We start to think, wow, I'd really love to buy a new car. Look, everybody else seems to have a new car. That happened to me just the other day. I drove up into a parking lot in my 2003 Hyundai Santa Fe with the paint falling off that I just love. It's a great car, gets me around, it's cheap to operate, it's awesome. But I was meeting some friends and I pulled up into this parking lot of this restaurant. It seemed like every other car was nicer than mine, and I started thinking, man, maybe I should buy a newer car too, because everybody else seems to have a newer car. Or we start thinking, man, I wonder if I should get a bigger house. Well, everybody else seems to have a bigger house. And if we start making our decisions that way, you know what's going to happen. We're going to end up getting what everybody else is getting. And we assume that everybody else is getting great stuff out of it, but we don't see that everybody else is also in debt up to their eyeballs. Everybody else is struggling with difficult issues in their marriage, right? We don't really want to have a life that's just like everybody else's. We want to make the wisest decisions. And oftentimes we use these kind of questions just to talk ourselves out of what's wise, don't we? To talk ourselves into things that are unwise. Well, if we're really going to live with a heart of wisdom, then there's a couple of things that I think we really have to get nailed down. And the first one is this, that real wisdom begins with our reverence for and submission to God. Real wisdom begins with our reverence for and submission to God. And we'll talk about why. King Solomon, who was the son of King David, he was going to be the third king in the line of the kingdom period of the nation of Israel. When Israel was in its heyday, right? They're going up and to the right in all kinds of categories. And young Solomon is going to inherit the kingdom from his father David. And he knows he needs some guidance in doing this. And so God appears to him and says, Solomon, what do you need to run my kingdom? And Solomon said, riches would be nice, big military would be nice, but I'll tell you what, I need wisdom to make good decisions. I need to know how to make the choices that are right so that I can govern the people correctly. And God said, Solomon, way to go. You picked the right thing. And because you picked wisdom and you didn't pick wealth and all these other things, I tell you what, I'm going to give you a heart of wisdom like nobody else's. You are going to be the wisest human being to ever live. Kings will line up to listen to your wisdom. And I'm going to give you everything else too. Riches and wealth and influence and all that other stuff too. It was a time when Israel was the wealthiest kingdom on the planet because God gave Solomon a heart of wisdom to make right choices and to know how to steward the kingdom well. And it's that Solomon that writes these proverbs down for us to tell us how to have a heart of wisdom. And this is what he writes. In Proverbs 9:10, he says this, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Now, I understand that for some of us, that kind of bugs us a little bit to hear the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Because we think, man, God is gracious and good and kind and loving and generous. Why should I have to be afraid of a God like that? But this is not that kind of fear. This is the kind of fear that is a reverence for, a deep knowledge of something that leads to a submission to that thing. In fact, real wisdom about anything important comes from a deep reverence for, that comes from a knowledge of, that leads us to a submission to something. Maybe it was a year ago or so, my wife came home. Now, you guys know that I have 3 boys. They're teenagers now, 17, 16, 14, right? Most of the times I'll tell you stories about them. I tried to kind of hide their identity because I don't want them to be, embarrassed or anything. But this time I don't. It was the 2 younger ones, okay? It was totally them. My wife comes home one day, and the house reeks of Axe body spray. Now, they're teenage boys, so we are familiar with Axe body spray seeping out under the doorways of the rooms of the kids. But I mean, it smelled like the house had been fumigated in Axe body spray when she came in the house. And the boys, these 2 younger ones, are acting particularly angelic. So she knew right away something was up, Hi, Mom, how are you? Come sit right here. How's your day today? Can I get you anything? And so as my wife is sitting there kind of going through the mail, she notices on our kitchen table there, it's got a wood top on it, she notices that part of the finish on the wood is kind of bubbled up in one corner of it. And she said, what happened to the table right here? Why is the finish all like this? And they start explaining as if explaining somehow makes it better what they did, okay? So, well, we were watching Mythbusters on TV the other day. Have you seen this show? They do all this science stuff, and they showed how Axe body spray is flammable. So we sprayed some of it on the table here, and we lit it on fire. You all need to pray more for me than you do, okay? I just tell you right now. And when my wife could breathe again, she's doing that mom thing, like, she's doing that, right? When she could finally speak again, she says, "What made you think it was okay to spray this on the table and light it on fire?" And my children, who need to learn how to lie, said, "Well, nothing happened when we did it to the floor, you know." Can I say they did not have enough reverence for and knowledge of that led them to a submission to the properties of fire in our house? The fear of fire, for all of you young people that are listening, and my kids who should be listening, the fear of fire is the beginning of wisdom about fire, isn't it? But if we want wisdom about life, then that begins with a reverence for, that comes from a knowledge of, that leads us to a submission to the source of life, the one who is the author of life, the one who created life and knows how life ought to run. And if we really want to have wisdom about life, it begins with a reverence for the one who gave us life in the first place. We need that kind of true north to know which decisions are more wise and which ones are less wise. We need a fixed point of reference to know what is more wise in the decisions that we make. And whether you're a teenager, right? Or whether you're in a place to make difficult decisions, you need that kind of fixed point. Did you guys see the movie Apollo 13? Did you see this movie? It talks about the history of the Apollo 13 mission to the moon. They were supposed to land on the moon. And they shot the rocket off towards the moon. There was a big explosion, damaged the spaceship. They had to slingshot it around the moon and bring it back to Earth. The batteries were running out of power. They had to shut down every system in the capsule to make sure that it didn't die in space and they lose the ability to steer the thing back to Earth. So these guys are piloting this basically dead ship back there with no systems working, and they realized that they were going to have to burn the engines to keep it on course back towards the Earth. But they didn't have a guidance system. The guidance system had been shut off. They were going to have to burn their engines and fly it in a particular direction without a guidance system. You see the problem of flying your ship without a guidance system, right? And so Tom Hanks, who is playing Jim Lovell, says, we just need one fixed point in space so we know what to head towards. We just need one immovable object. And he looked out the window, and the Earth was in the window, and he says, I think we got one. He says, the Earth isn't going anywhere. We'll just keep that in the window, fire up the engines, and fly towards that. We just need one fixed point in space. And that's what we need, isn't it? That one point of reference to know how to guide our life towards it. It's how a map works with a compass. You ever seen how that works? If you're lost out in the woods and all you have is a map, you don't really have a lot of help until you get a compass that really only tells you one piece of information. It only tells you where true north is. And what you do with the compass is you set it on the map, line it up towards north, and then line the map up with where true north is. And as you know the truth that compass tells you, as you know the one thing that is true, now you know everything else that's true also. As you know where true north is, you know where everything else is as well. That's how wisdom works. We need that fixed point in space. We need to know where true north is so that we know which way to go, how to make wise choices. And if you're a teenager, you need this. And if you're the Supreme Court of the United States, you need this. Hang on, because I may say stuff you might not like in a minute. You're going to be booing me here in a second, okay? Without that kind of true north, without that fixed point, we're just left to do our best, and the best we can do is guess, right? And unless you've been living in a cave, and if you have been, we love people who live in caves. God bless you, come as you are. You can be a part of us, right? But there has been this decision that has been made this week by our Supreme Court. They got together and decided something. And probably many of you came here today wondering, man, what is our church then going to decide based on what the Supreme Court has decided? So I thought it'd be important for us to take a second and talk about that, okay? Now realize as we do, you're sitting in a room full of people that don't all share your opinion. Do you understand that? There's a lot of people here. And not everybody has the same opinion that you have. And we all want to clap for our side and acknowledge our side, and that's fine. But we got to be aware and respectful of the fact that there are people that may be sitting right next to you that have a completely different opinion that you do. So as we talk about it, it's important to understand that. And it's important to let that inform us about how we talk about things. So this is what our church has decided to do. Because you see, our church has always been about trying to do our very best to use God as that fixed point in space for us. That He is our true north. The God who is the God of creation, who revealed Himself to us through His creation and through the pages of Scripture and through His Son Jesus. We try to look at Him and use Him as a guide to make decisions. We can't stand up here and advocate that to you for your personal life and not try to do that as an organization, right? And that's what we try to do. Let me tell you, we don't always get that right. We make mistakes about that all the time. That's why we don't say, hey, we're perfect. We say Jesus is perfect. Let's all look at Him, okay? Let's all do our best to follow Him. And so, based on doing that, the decision that we have made in this case is to continue doing what our church has always done, which is to perform marriages that are between one man and one woman. Now, hang on, okay, just hang on. But that also means we're also going to keep doing something else too. That we're also going to always keep the doors of this church wide open to anybody, whether you are black or white, whether you're black or white, whether you're Asian, whether you're Hispanic, whether you are gay or you're straight or transgender. We will keep the doors of our church, hang on, look. Thank you guys, I appreciate it. We are going to keep the doors of our church open to anybody who legitimately wants to come with us to look at Jesus and to aim our life at Him and to use Him as our fixed point, as our true north, and to say, we're just going to try and be like Him. We're just going to try to do what He does. We're going to try to learn everything we can about what He teaches and follow Him. And we won't always get it right. You won't always get it right, right? In fact, we're all here because we don't always get it right. In fact, we have one membership requirement. You got to be a messed up sinner to come, okay? That's it. Literally, if you come and you think you're not a messed up sinner, this is not the place for you. Because all of us know that the ground is level when it comes to us being messed up sinners, isn't it? Amen. And there is none of us that don't need to look at Jesus and adjust our life and submit every part of our life, our decisions, our choices, our relationships, our sexuality, every part of our life, and submit it to Jesus. That's what we all got to do, all of us. So that's what we're going to keep doing as a church. And let me just say this too. When you say things like, we believe that sexual activity is reserved for people who are married, and you say marriage is reserved for a man and a woman, you got to understand what you have just said to a lot of people is, if you want to come and follow Jesus that way, you're going to have a harder road than some of us have to walk. They'll have a harder road than I have to walk. I'm married to a woman. If you're a single person, it's a harder road to walk, to say that sex is reserved for marriage. And we can't hold the standard up like that and stand on a stump and yell it at the top of our lungs or wag our finger in the face of somebody else who has a more difficult road than we do. We got to understand that we say those words and hold up those standards with compassion, with humility, with respect for people who would have to walk that road. And we're all on that journey, and we need to be careful about how we say it. Okay? And thanks. So as we have conversations with each other, I don't know how everybody else is doing it. Well, I kind of do, because I've been on Facebook this week too. But how about for us? How about if we decide that the way we're going to have conversations about it is that we're going to speak honorably and respectfully and with compassion and humility and with genuine love and care for people who have a completely different opinion than we do? Can we just agree to do that? And whether we speak in person or whether we speak on Facebook or wherever you happen to be speaking, that's the way that we're going to do it, because I think that's God's way. And I think that's what Jesus would want from us, okay? Okay, let's talk about something else, all right? If you're going to have wisdom, though, right, we got to have that fixed point. We got to know what's more wise and what's not. Real wisdom comes from reverence for and submission to our God. Second thing, though, we got to get is that real wisdom is about action, not information. It's about doing, not just knowing. And sometimes how many of us have been in a place where we know the right thing to do, staring into our refrigerator, and we don't do it? Right? We know the things that we ought to do, and we don't. Real wisdom is not just about knowing. Real wisdom is about doing. And James, who is the half-brother of Jesus, wrote these words for us. He said, "Who is wise and understanding among you? If you are, then let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." So wisdom is about what we do. And there are some things that we can do to help us to develop a heart of wisdom. And we got some of these here for you. Some practical things that you can do. First of all, you can notice what you're seeing. Notice what it is you're seeing. How do you see things? How do you interpret the circumstances they're in? Do you see those things from God's perspective? Proverbs 17:24 says this, that a discerning person keeps wisdom in view, but a fool's eyes wander to the ends of the earth. In other words, when we are deciding what's wise, we keep what is wisdom, we keep God's perspective, wisdom in view. We don't just look around and see what everybody else is thinking and what everybody else is doing. Notice what we're seeing. The second thing we got to do is notice what we're starting. Notice what we're starting. Am I getting something started in my life that I cannot righteously continue? That if I go down this road, can I righteously continue this course? Proverbs 22:3, and parents, you ought to write this down and teach it to your children. Proverbs 22:3. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. What are you getting started in your life right now? Well, it's just a cup of coffee. It's just a text message. What are you starting in your life that you can't righteously continue? We also got to notice who we're shadowing. Notice who it is we're shadowing. Am I admiring somebody, holding up somebody's values that I really can't advocate for me living that kind of life? Proverbs 13:20 says this, "Walk with the wise and you will become wise. For a companion of fools suffers harm." Go with wise people, walk with wise people, and you'll become wiser. But if you're the companion of fools, I expected it to say you'll become a fool, but that's not what it says. It says the companion of fools suffers for it. And you know that's true. Parents, that's why you're so concerned about who your kids are hanging out with. Not because you think your kid is a fool, but because you're afraid of the consequences they're going to experience because of who they're hanging out with. Right? It's why wives are concerned about who their husbands are hanging out with, and why husbands are concerned about who their wives are hanging out with. Because when we walk with the wise, we know we get wiser. But when we walk with fools, we know that eventually their bad decisions will slop over onto us, and we will suffer the same consequences that they do. Who am I shadowing? If we want to be wise, we got to continually ask the question, what is the wisest thing to do? Now, we can get all that, and that's all fine and good, but I saved the hard part for last, okay? Are you ready for the hard part? As if we haven't already had the hard part, right? But this is the hard part. There are 3 words that will kill wisdom, and they might just kill you. 3 words. I know better. I know better. Not the I know better like, yeah, I know better than to do that. But the I know better, like, it doesn't matter what you tell me, I know better. I don't care what God says, I know better. Last July, about 4 years ago, July, I was in California. I remember hearing this news story about this church group that had gone up to Yosemite Valley to see the falls that were flowing. Here, that California used to have water running through it, amazing thing. And one of the rivers, the Merced River, flows through Yosemite Valley, and it creates vernal falls, which is a 317-foot waterfall there in Yosemite Valley. Beautiful. Lots of people go up to see it. And this church group had gone up to see it. And there were some 20-somethings in the group as well. And this news story came out of Yosemite Valley that week in July in 2011. It says the group was witnessed entering the water above Vernal Falls, approximately 25 feet from the precipice. 25 feet, that's about from me to where that guitar is back there. Not very far, from a 300-foot waterfall. Witnesses reported to park officials that several people urged the group members to step back from the river since it was flowing swiftly and was extremely cold. People standing there going, get out of the water, get back from the river. The area is signed as a dangerous area. These signs right here are posted right by Vernal Falls. Stay out of the water. Powerful hidden currents will carry you over the falls. Stay back from slippery rock at the water's edge. If you go over the falls, you will die. People urging them, signs posted. And the group had crossed a metal guardrail placed to keep visitors away from the dangerous and fast-moving water. People urging them to get out of the water. Signs posted saying, you will die. A metal barricade to keep them away that they had to climb over. And they did it all because they knew better than the people warning them, than the signs warning them, than the barricade meant to keep them away. And you know what happened? 3 people went over that waterfall that day and died. Church people, good people, smart people, because they knew better. And we think, man, that would never happen to me. And that couldn't, I wouldn't do something like that. I'm smarter than that. Remember King Solomon that we talked about? Who asked God for wisdom, and God gave him so much wisdom that the kings of the world would line up just to listen to his wisdom. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. You say, well, what was wrong with that? Maybe it was a different culture, a different time, whatever. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel. You must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth meaning princesses of other kingdoms that worshiped other gods, and 300 concubines. And in fact, to no one's surprise, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord. This is the wisest person to ever live apart from Jesus. This is the smartest guy on the planet. The Lord was angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. God appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods. But Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. All because Solomon knew better. It's ironic to me that in Proverbs chapter 1, the writings of Solomon, Proverbs is this book of wisdom that Solomon wrote down to warn us, to guide us, to tell us about how to live lives that were wise, that did the right things. And in chapter 1 of the book of Proverbs that Solomon wrote, he paints the picture of wisdom being this woman who calls out in the streets to woo people to come and follow her, follow wisdom. Solomon writes this: wisdom shouts in the streets. She cries out in the public square. She calls to the crowd along the main street, those gathered in front of the city gate. How long, you simpletons? How long will you insist on being simple-minded? How long will you mockers relish your mocking? How long will you fools hate knowledge? Come and listen to my counsel. I'll share my heart with you and make you wise. I called you so often, but you wouldn't come. I reached out to you, but you paid no attention. You ignored my advice and rejected the correction that I offered. So I will laugh when you are in trouble. I will mock you when disaster overtakes you, when calamity overtakes you like a storm, when disaster engulfs you like a cyclone, and anguish and distress overwhelm you. When you get yourself into one of those moments when you're saying, if I would have done what I should have done, this all could have been different. Wisdom will be right there going, you knew. You knew. You knew which way to go. You knew the right choice to make. Wisdom will be there, almost mocking us in those moments. When they cry for help, I will not answer. Though they anxiously search for me, they will not find me. For they hated knowledge and chose not to fear the Lord. They reject my advice and paid no attention when I corrected them. Therefore, they must eat the bitter fruit of living their own way, choking on their own schemes. For simpletons turn away from me to death. Fools are destroyed by their own complacency. But then he gives us some hope. He turns it. He says, but all who listen to me, all who will listen to wisdom, all who will stop and ask the question, what is the wisest thing to do? All who will listen to me will live in peace, untroubled by fear of harm. So, what happened to you? How did you get the way you are? How did your family get the way it is? How did your kids turn out the way they turned out? Well, one day I decided. I chose. I decided that I needed a true north. I decided that if I was going to fly this ship in the right direction, I decided that I needed a fixed point in space to tell me whether my decisions were wise or not. And I decided that I was going to submit myself the best I could, not perfect, not getting it right every time, but I decided I was going to submit myself to a loving God who had my best interest in mind every single time. And I was going to do my dead level best to keep him in the window of my life and to aim my life in his direction. I decided. And what you see is the end result of that decision, and that I think I can live with. The way to life is for you and I to ask, out of reverence for God, out of a knowledge of who he is, out of hearts that submit to him, to ask the question, what is the wisest thing for me to do? Let's stand together and pray together. Father, we are so thankful to you that you come to help us to know how to live, to know how to make choices. Because God, this life is complicated. There are so many things that pull on us, so many influences that push on our life, so many things that we feel, moments that are just confusing for us to navigate. So God, we pray that you would help us in those moments to ask you, God, what is the wisest thing for us to do? To hear you, to not move until we know, and we can at least have some confidence. So that, God, those decisions can shape our life. And we can look back, and instead of saying we woulda, shoulda, coulda, that, God, we can look back and be able to say, I have a life lived with God in the window. Life lived with God is my true north. And the life that will honor you and that you can bless. God, help us to have courage to that end. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys. Thanks for coming. Get prayer down front or in the back. We'll see you next time.